Call the roll, please.
Yes. Director Rennie?
Here.
Director Schmidt?
Here.
Director Yulo? Here. Director Griffith?
Here.
Director Miller? Here. Director Sinks?
Here.
Director Gibbons?
Here.
And I also like to note that Director Zabikoga.
She's walking in now.
She's walking in, okay. Vice Chair Harney, Cortese, Bruins, and Craig are absent tonight.
Okay. Thank you. So next item is there any member of the public that wishes to speak to us about an item not on the agenda? And we wore them all out Monday night. So seeing none, I will close the initial public comment period and move on. Next item is our consent agenda. We have 4 items, which are approve the minutes of the September 13th meeting, approve the invitation letter to the City of Milpitas, August Treasurer's Report, and confirm the interim SVCE standby S rate. Would any member of the board wish to pull an item from the consent calendar? Mr. Griffith?
1B.
Okay, I have interest in pulling 1B. Anybody else? Would any member of the public wish to pull an item from the consent calendar? Seeing none, I will come back to the board and looking for a motion for consent items except at 1B.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, motion passes unanimously. Director Cortese has joined us now. So let's go to Mr. Griffith, I think, on 1B.
Yes, thank you. Our staff sent in some questions on this particular item, and I wanted to sort of revisit a couple of them. The primary one is, what is our plan for the financial commitment that would be requested from Milpitas?
Yeah, so upon approval of this letter, and again, I just want to reiterate, this is just the approval of the invitation to the letter. So we still have a formal process through the joint powers agreement that we have to follow to actually have Milpitas join us. And then at that point, we would get a lot more details next month with a feasibility study. So at this point, I don't have a feasibility study done, but that's in the works.
Okay. So a lot of the specifics are going to come later. My biggest concern is if we are inviting Milpitas to join, we need to set the expectations for Milpitas correctly. Financial is one of the big ones. The other one that comes to mind for me is we are having extended discussions about the extent to which we are going to be capable in the future of providing or claiming to provide 100% carbon-free, 50% renewables. Are they up to speed on that? I think that's an important consideration, because if they're going to come in thinking they're going to get 50% renewable, 100% carbon free, and we're going to turn around in 2 months, 6 months, whatever it is, and start changing things, they probably should know that up front. And it's not clear to me the extent to which they're aware of that particular discussion.
And we plan to have a presentation ready at the next council meeting at the City of Milpitas, and certainly we'll touch upon those points that you just made.
Right, because I know as recently as July, we were going out to community groups saying we're 100% carbon free. If we're doing that to Milpitas, that's really, really bad. We shouldn't be doing that anywhere, but particularly not when we're inviting somebody to take a financial stake in the organization.
I completely agree.
That's all I had. So.
Okay, Director Miller?
Yeah, I just want to address the financial a little bit. There are certain costs that will be borne, a feasibility study and all that. Now, all of us had made an initial contribution, and when we started roughing out this last year's budget, we had originally intended to pay back all the cities by December. And the way we approved the budget was we would do it by the end of the fiscal year. And so with that as the backdrop, when we first engaged Milpitas, just for clarity, we didn't feel that there was going to be a financial contribution that looked like what us cities did initially to bridge the cash flow. And again, I think out of fairness, they should bear the costs to join us, but I think there probably needs to be a discussion if we're asking them to provide liquidity to the organization as we all did, because at this juncture, I don't believe it's necessary. So, but I think you have more to do, and there's a point that we're going to get to where I think we need to talk through those details. I just think there's a cost associated with joining. They should bear that cost. The liquidity part may not be as relevant, but we should have that discussion when and if we get to that level.
Great.
Director Gibbons?
On that point, I thought I read that we are not asking for any of the funding.
So in the letter, we do state we're not looking for any sort of entrance fee, going back to the liquidity issue, because we feel we do not need that.
Right.
But having said that, we want to clarify that in this letter before it goes out tomorrow. So having said that, what is the board's feeling on that?
Director Sinks?
So if I remember our discussion at the budget hearing, we talked about returning the seed capital to the cities by the end of this year. Are we still planning to do that?
We can.
Okay. And I mean, I think if at the same time we're returning the seed capital to all the cities, we're going out and asking Milpitas for some contribution. I mean, this doesn't make sense to me. That it ought to be self-funded from ratepayers at this point, I would think.
And we've, without running the feasibility study, just intuitively, the variable costs as well as the fixed costs would be covered by the incremental revenue,
Right.
bringing Milpitas in. So,
And if I remember, the request to study load is a request that the city must authorize, and it's a very nominal fee. Does anybody here recall what it is? It was
$700 to $900.
$700 to $900. I mean, if that's our incremental cost to bring them on, I would just as soon, I mean, I'm expressing my own opinion here, but I think it makes sense for us to say, you know, we will more than recover that from the rate base in the first 24 hours of operation in that city. And I mean, given where we're currently at, and, you know, I just think it's very helpful. I was encouraged to see that their own commission or the study committee that had been formed had recommended, of the choices that the council was contemplating at the last meeting, right? They were talking about, oh, should we join East Bay, or should we join San Jose, or should we join Silicon Valley? The conclusion was unanimous, and that is join us. I certainly think we should be welcoming to them.
and just point out in the staff report that Don Bray attended their Economic Development Council meeting on Monday night, and it was voted unanimously to recommend to their council that they join us as
I
well.
mean, they have a substantial load, right? And
It
an
is.
industrial load,
Right.
as well as residential, so I think, I'm certainly in favor of moving forward with this.
Just point out in the letter that we said no entrance fees. We don't feel we need that liquidity. That's why we
And
stated that.
just so the board's aware, there will be more incremental cost because we have to do either 4 or 6 mailers and some marketing and so forth. But the other cities didn't pay for that either. It was paid for by our seed capital, which they're going to get back. So, I think we want to encourage more cities to get on the CCA bandwagon. So I don't know that we need to create. I agree, we don't need to create costs for them to do that or inhibitors for them to do that. Unless there's truly something that's going to cost us more that's unusual, and I'm not seeing it.
We're not either. We'll try to flush that out through the feasibility study, but no.
I just wonder about, we're going to do staff time, we're going to do legal time on an agreement. It just seems like there's going to be some amount of cost borne that was sort of borne by our staff and the way we initially did this. I don't know how you account for all that, but
So one thing to keep in mind is we're talking about spending our ratepayers' money on programs. How much different is programs going to make versus getting Milpitas to be 100% carbon-free?
or whatever our new statement is about carbon neutral.
99% carbon-free, whatever, yes,
Yeah.
but
I know.
far beyond where they are, let's put it that way.
I very much understand that. I will just point out the obvious, which it would be awkward for us to let them in with no money up front if our cities had not gotten their money back by the time they start service.
Tony, Mr. Director Yulo?
I'm very comfortable with saying, with the words "no entrance fee" as in the letter already. If it's $900, that's fine, and the other costs will be more than paid for. by their ratepayers. I do think Director Griffith brought up a very good point about we need to stop now using the words carbon-free. It's an important distinction that should be corrected at this point.
So I do have one speaker from the public. Let me let them speak at this point. So I'll open the public testimony. Bruce Carney, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you for considering this topic. In my attempts to support Milpitas's entry into Silicon Valley Clean Energy, I attended one meeting of their Economic Development Commission, not the one that was held on Monday, and one city council meeting, and I've researched the interesting political dynamic of their council and the recent resignation of their city manager. Milpitas is an interesting community, unlike any of the others that I visited when I was trying to support the creation of SVCE. It's clearly a multi-ethnic, multilingual community where public speakers often come to the microphone and have their comments translated from Vietnamese or Spanish or Tagalog. It is not a community that, as far as I can tell, is overrun with environmental advocates. It has a council that swings more to the conservative side of the spectrum than most of the other councils here. And what I've heard from staff is that in previous presentations to the Milpitas Council, they have not been overwhelmed with the sense that the council really understands the value proposition that SVCE brings. So I would encourage you to treat this process with the utmost tact and to clear away any barriers that a city council member in Milpitas might say, well, see, that exposes us to risk, that exposes us to financial challenges. Please make it as easy as you possibly can for them to say yes to a simple, straightforward opportunity, because as we look at the programs that are available to us going forward, there's no place else that you can get as big a bang for the buck and such a high impact as bringing Milpitas into SVCE. So I hope that this one opportunity will be successful, and then we can move on, having completed all of the sign-ups of the cities in our county that we can, and work on programs that make a big difference as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else from the public wish to address us on this item? Seeing none, I'll close the public testimony and come back to the board members. So the question is, would we like something changed in the letter? Would we like the letter not sent at this time? Would we like to have it go as is?
So, Mr. Chair, I'd be willing to make a motion.
All right, please.
I make a motion to approve the invitation letter as provided in our packet.
Seconded.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
So with the language carbon-free?
With the correction on the use of the language. Thank you for that.
Okay. I was going to offer a friendly amendment, but if you amend yourself, you can
Consider myself amended.
And seconded.
And so we'll leave staff to figure out
Carbon
how-
neutral, I mean,
what that correction is. That's okay? All right. Any other comments then? Seeing none, I'll call the question then. All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? I believe we are unanimous. So with that, let's move on to our regular calendar. So as I expect usual, Director Cortese has to leave at 8. So the usual recommendation is move the action ones up. So if we could go to number 4 first from staff, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So at the August board meeting when we talked about rates, I think there was consensus with the board that we could move the November meeting instead of the second Wednesday of the month to the third Wednesday, which would be November 15th, to accommodate the schedule for when those rates are released by PG&E, and then gives us time then to update those rate schedules. The only reason I don't have this on consent and pulled it out for discussion is staff was also alerted that on November 15th, there's a National League of Conference City Summit, and I just wanted to make sure that we had a quorum for that November 15th. If we don't, I do have a workaround. And also that meeting would then be at the Sunnyvale Community Center, as this room's not available.
Okay, so I guess that's an invitation for board members to say if they're not going to be here. Director Miller?
Yeah, I have a real problem with setting rates on getting a quorum. We should be setting rates based on getting all 12 cities represented, and picking a date for which there is a known council meeting is not good. And then there's this other thing, and so it's complicated for
Whose
my
council
city,
meeting?
because we're first and third Wednesday of the month,
Oh, you are?
SRB.
and so
And they have a meeting that night, too.
I really think that we should be trying to find a date in which we can get all 12 of us to set rates. I think it would just seem super awkward if you had 7 and we set rates. As for the date, you've heard my issue, and there's some others. I think the 15th is not a good date. I do not have an alternate to propose at this time, but maybe it's one of those doodle things.
Okay, any other comments?
I agree with Howard. I realize maybe we ought to, it's convenient for rate setting to be a little later, but, you know, there ought to be a really compelling reason to move a regular meeting. And, I mean, if you have another suggestion, I'm all ears, but I don't like the idea that we would be having this meeting on the same night as council meetings.
We could go as late as, let's say, December 6th to have that meeting, to have enough time for Calpine and then update the rates.
I can,
So go ahead, Director
suggestion, I think it's the 29th, Wednesday the 29th is the 5th Friday, Wednesday. Can we do that?
Sure.
Because usually there's nothing on a 5th Friday. Wednesday.
No, it's
the week
week after Thanksgiving.
Oh, that's great.
Look at that.
So if I heard that right, we would shoot for the 29th. I'll see what the availability is of the other staff or the other board members. And
Okay, so this is an action item, so I guess I need a motion to do something,
I'll second her motion.
which was to move it to the or try to move it to the 29th?
and we can go to as late as the 6th.
Yeah, we can move it to the 29th, or in the alternative to the 6th, or the 29th doesn't work.
Well, the 6th, there are council meetings.
They have a council meeting.
Okay, so it would be the 29th, yeah.
Well,
I
we
guess
could go
I'm
the
unclear
29th up to the 6th.
what the motion is. Is it to move it to the 29th definitively? We don't have another meeting between now and then, so we have to take action tonight, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Director Griffith?
Yeah, I would say move it to the 29th contingent on polling the directors who are not present tonight.
Well, and if one of them has
And what's our
conflict, then
backup?
what?
We have to come up with some other backup, but, you know, having one where 3 people can't make it as well, you know, that's why we're vetoing the 15th.
No, I'm with you on all of that. I'm just asking, given that the 29th is fine for those of us that are here, if it turns out that we can't, what would anybody propose for backup?
Well, I'm hopeful that we can get somebody from every city, so it's not just that a person can't make it, but them and their alternate can't make it.
Well, I
'Cause
would
want to have every city represented.
I would assume that if staff determines that the 29th is not viable, they would poll the members to try and find another date.
I would hope so.
But would we have to take action other than tonight? That I was following up on the comment that we have to take action tonight.
Generally speaking, scheduling a meeting isn't something that requires action of the board. I mean, they chose to bring it forward, but they're not required to. So,
Okay.
Well, only thing is, we do need, if we change our meeting location, the board needs to approve that. It looks like if it's on the 29th, though, it would still be here. Is that correct?
I'll have to confirm that. Okay.
And the other thing is that if it turned out 29th doesn't work, then you would probably be meeting on the first meeting in or
November.
the normal meeting date in November. If there's a need for an adjournment of that meeting, that could be adjourned at that point in time to a meeting to consider the rates at a
That
different
makes me
time.
happier.
So could the board approve a choice of, say, 3 meeting locations tonight, or it has to be?
That'd be fine. Yeah, sure, we could do that. Yes, whatever is available, but we should designate if there's going to be an alternative meeting date.
So maybe
Or
that's,
time,
I suggest maybe we add to the motion a couple other possible places that we would be, that are possible, likely that we could get, just in case.
So the motion would be to move the meeting, November meeting, from the 8th through the 29th, and location either Cupertino, Sunnyvale, and I can check with Mountain View.
We could say
Okay. I can't,
The county might
I
be
don't know.
available too, yeah.
we can true up that. I just don't know tonight what would be available.
So of a choice of one of those locations.
Okay, is there a second? So there's a second or?
I'll approve the.
Okay.
And you included Mountain View in there,
Yeah.
right? So now we have 4.
And any, okay, so any other comments?
Can I ask a question through the chair for
Sure.
future reference? Can't this board delegate to the chair? I understand you, counsel, that you said that the board has to take action, but can't the board take action by delegating to the chair in the event that there's a conflict with the date, that your chair call a meeting on an appropriate date and time?
In place.
That would be fine for you to authorize the chair to do that, yeah.
I mean, it doesn't sound like that's necessary right now, but I just wanted to make that clarification for future reference.
Yes, that's a good question. Yep.
All right, so we're ready to call a question then. All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Looks like it's unanimous. All right, so let's move on to number 5, which is also an item, actionable item.
Pam Leonard will be presenting.
All right, thank you.
Good evening, Board and Chair. Pamela Leonard, Community Outreach Manager. This evening, we would like to bring to you a suggestion to amend one of the motions that was passed last month for our Customer Program Advisory Group. So on your screen, if you could please cue the presentation, thank you. This is the motion as it was passed last month, that we did agree to establish a Customer Program Advisory Group for the purpose of providing input on our programs. Each board member would appoint a residential SVCE customer from each of your communities. The CEO may appoint up to 3 at-large members from the applicant pool, and a uniform application will be provided to all of the communities to distribute. The application will also include a conflict of interest screening, and we have consulted our legal counsel on whether or not a financial disclosure is required. The meetings will be Brown Acted and minutes will be published, and the committee will report to the board. This is for a 9-month timeline, so this committee, being a temporary ad hoc advisory group, would sunset in 9 months from its first meeting date. And the staff reports, or we will have staff reports from the Customer Advisory Group to report back to the Board of Directors, in addition to staff reports that also reflect the Sustainability Managers Roundtable meetings. The parts of the motion that we would like to discuss this evening and are recommending to amend are related to the appointment process for the members, as well as the number of at-large members that the CEO may appoint. So in the recommendation to amend this motion that each community appoints one individual to serve on this advisory group, we are recommending the board tonight take an action to form a subcommittee of the board that would be the selection subcommittee. This would allow for the selection committee to view a full pool of applicants that can help us to find representation on this advisory group that represents a diverse set of interests and experience as it relates to the broad range of programs that we are attempting to put together that can serve all of our customers. And in addition to supporting this, we also discussed in the executive committee meeting that board members can still provide a list of their top candidates that may be folks they're very familiar with in their communities who they know would do a good job serving on this committee. They could still provide a list of their top candidates to the selection subcommittee for consideration. And we also discussed that the CEO appointment of 3 at-large positions could be extended up to 5 in case there are additional gaps that we would like to fill on the advisory group. And just a reminder as to why we are suggesting this, and to clarify a couple of other points, we think that we would really like to have residential representation for customers who are representing community-based organizations or their neighborhood associations. It's important to get the residential interests of our residential customers, but we also know that there are a lot of strong environmental advocates in the community. There are folks who have maybe perhaps retired or just have a lot of interest or expertise related to the field that we are in energy and efforts to reduce climate change. So we think that having full visibility into this pool of applicants by a subcommittee will help us to see that we can try to have this broad range of expertise and interests represented in the Customer Program Advisory Group. And this way we could, my next point is that, the concern is without seeing the type of expertise that is being put forward by the appointments from each member community without a subcommittee, it's possible that we end up with 12 environmentally focused advocates with similar backgrounds. And so we just really would like to try to get communities involved, business organizations, because we also wanted to ask if the motion passed as residential customers, but then there were also discussions about small and medium businesses. So we are also suggesting that we can have business organization representatives, so downtown business associations, or perhaps someone who's a business owner in one of your communities, or a chamber representative. And so the other part of that too is if the appointees must live or work in the SVCE service area. So this is a point of clarification that we'd like a little bit of direction tonight on this. We are recommending live or work because, again, in order to try to be as robust as we can in the representation on the Customer Program Advisory Group, we may have some opportunities with residents who perhaps live in Gilroy and work in Sunnyvale, for example, and we can look at how they can help fill out this group and how it represents our county's geography. So the next point is we were asked to come back with some more clarity around the conflict of interest. After consulting with our general counsel, it was determined that the members would not be subject to financial disclosures because this is a temporary advisory group. But it's up to the board if they should be still subject to our own conflict of interest code. And that was the direction we got in the motion, that they would be subject to this. And so in the draft application provided in your packets, we have a self-reporting conflict of interest section for transparency. We don't think that this is something that may or may not disqualify an applicant from being selected, because we think it's important that representatives who may have really relevant interest or expertise in any of the fields that our programs could potentially affect, we may be really interested in hearing from someone who has a lot of industry experience in the solar industry or with electric vehicles, for example. So for the timeline and next steps, this has not changed much from the last meeting. We're still on our initial targets. That after we get direction this evening as to whether or not to select option B, which is our suggestion to amend the motion and have a subcommittee, or to stick with the original motion as it was passed last month, we can still have an application out as soon as next week and have about a 4-week application period and still move on with our selections by December with the first meeting in January. And, one other point in here, which is the last bullet, the or sooner. We also would like to just point out or seek some clarification that instead of waiting all the way until June to have a final report of the Customer Program Advisory Group on what their selection criteria may be, if the group moves quicker than anticipated, or there are some opportunities that arise that are very timely, that we may bring those program suggestions to the board sooner than June. So that's not a fixed deadline for when everything comes to you, but the deadline to report the results of the criteria and however else we want to report back from that group.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Director Miller and Director Griffith?
Sort of a question or comment. Something got a little lost in the translation. I think the assumption for this group, at least as I recall, was that we thought that this board would exist forever. The 9 months was the time necessary for us to set up what a citizen advisory board would be, what the roles and responsibilities and all of that were. So this initial one, they were going to be appointed, but we didn't think that it was 9 months and done. That 9 months is what was going to give us the time to be able to write up the roles and responsibilities and come to an agreement as a group up here of what we wanted the advisory committee to do. And so you talk about this as being very transient. This is one step to a permanent or an ongoing advisory committee. So I'm not sure if it changes anything in this, but I just don't want to lose track of that.
I think some board members aren't going to agree with you, so we'll let
Well, I think
them.
we should go watch the tape, because it was pretty clear that we were going to go ongoing and that we expected to work through a process with us as a group. You can shake your head no, but the tape is the tape. We as a group were going to work to figure out what the roles and responsibilities, where they reported into the organization and what duties and stuff we expected them to do. And that this was going to be an ongoing effort to continue to get customer involvement.
Okay, Director Griffith?
Yeah, let me start by responding to that. I think there was agreement that there would be an ongoing group and that there needed to be an ongoing group, but not that this group would transition to be that, because the membership of this group and its mission and the type of input it was going to be providing is markedly different from what we would expect of a larger group.
And I agree with you 100%. I didn't mean to imply anything different about this thing. I just didn't want to lose track of, we're working to something
So
else.
this group, in its nature, was fully intended to be transient, 9 months and go away. And this was one of the questions I was going to bring up is, you know, this is fine, but what's our plan for the permanent group? Because I do want to have that permanent group, the sooner the better, because I think there are any number of people that should be weighing in. I do know we've talked about simply adding non-staff to the TAC. I don't think that's the right approach. I think having a resident committee, so, but at any rate, hopefully that.
We're in agreement, Jim. I didn't mean to imply anything.
Great. So let me get to my questions. First, let me thank staff for bringing this forward. I greatly appreciate staff's recommendation. I find myself in a lot of agreement with both the approach that's being suggested and the reasons behind it. I wanted to bring up a couple of questions and clarifications. One, and this is a couple slides back, so I can't see it right now. You talked about the various qualifications for it, and what immediately springs to mind is that this body is supposed to be representative of the ratepayers in general, so that we can get an idea of what the typical customer might be interested in terms of program. And one of the typical customers we have, which is a not insignificant group, is the naysayer. It's the person who is really primarily only interested in what's going to make my life easier and save me the most money. And none of the experience that's listed here would a naysayer necessarily qualify for. So I'm a little reluctant to require experience in those areas, because I want somebody who's in here saying, I don't know if you guys are doing the right job, but I want to make sure that my interests are protected, has a shot at doing this. And I'd like to make sure that whatever we present covers that. You mentioned small and medium businesses. What about large businesses? Why are we deliberately excluding large businesses as a consideration? I think we should be considering them. And I don't know if you want to answer or if this is strictly, rhetorical.
I can answer that.
Sure.
So when we presented this, Don Bray came up and said that the interests of the commercial and industrial community are very different. And so we are in the process of planning workshops to gain feedback and priorities from the commercial community. It's just a different type of relationship, I believe. So we are going to continue to gather feedback from that group in a separate forum.
And I buy that completely. That raises another question, which is, are we going to be setting aside a portion of the program budget to be catering to large business separate from this then?
Yes.
Great. Okay. Wonderful. If that's the case, then I'm fine with that. You specifically mentioned in here industry or trade association members as rights. No, sorry, wrong one. You listed for the conflict of interest. You mentioned energy efficient products. I'd like to make sure if we're putting anything out, it says products or services. If someone is doing, for instance, home energy retrofits, since that's something we may want to lump in as a project budget, that would definitely be a conflict of interest. One question I did have, we seem to be shooting for 15 members. Are we dead set on that? Because my immediate reaction is that's a lot of people. And we already see with 12 members up here, we end up having 3 people, all of whom have to express the exact same opinion, which, you know, it doesn't really contribute to the end result. It just takes up a whole lot more time. And I'd be more comfortable with the group being represented by, as you know, 8 to 10 than 15 if we end up going with this. Obviously, if we end up sticking with one per director, that's not going to work. But if we don't, I'm more happy with 8 to 10. And I'm throwing that out there for other people to consider. And the last one's a little touchier in the schedule that you've laid out. You say in January, the committee that gets selected would meet to define its charter. It seems to me the committee is not going to be defining its own charter. We're going to be defining its charter. So how do we correct that? And that's a question to staff.
Yeah, that can be corrected.
And one option that springs to mind is if we do form a subcommittee to select the members, the subcommittee could also be responsible for drafting a proposed charter, which is going to be pretty minimal, and bringing it back for the full committee for the full board to vote on.
Yeah.
I'll toss that out there as a possible answer, but I don't, you know, other than picking its own chair and vice chair, this committee should not be defining its own way. And I'm done. Thank you.
Director Yulo, did you have some? No? We'll go Director Schmidt. We're down this end.
Great, thanks. To Director Griffith's point, I agree that the charter of this committee or this advisory group is critical, and it really needs to be defined by the board, us, either a subcommittee or the entire board, and not by staff or not by them. So I totally agree with that. I question, as I understand it, option A is one representative per 12 jurisdictions, and option B is not necessarily one from each jurisdiction. So there could be jurisdictions that don't have a representative on option B. Is that correct?
And possible, we would still strive to have representation across the geography of our service area. That is really important to us.
Seems like it's going to be quite a challenge to have representatives from all the demographics and all the groups and all the jurisdictions.
I'm
That's a pretty big
attempting it.
group. Thank you. That's a very
So I'll just add, at executive committee, we envisioned it could go either way, and it's really the feeling of the people up here. But executive committee, we talked about we would have each city provide a pool of 2, 3, or 1, or 4, whatever, and then the subcommittee would make sure they pick somebody from every city, but they would be picking in ways that they also covered the other areas that staff thought was important. That's a possible way to go if you're worried about the idea that some city's not going to be representative. I personally am not that married to, it has to be somebody from Los Gatos. I think somebody from Campbell can represent Los Gatos just as well. But I know some board members seem to have strong opinions last time, so we'll see if they have them. Any other Director Sinks?
Well, I think we're overthinking this. I mean, the mission of this body for the first 9 months, we talked about it being, a trial toward something we might do. But it was specifically to advise us on programs. I think that's their charter. I think we'd make it that simple. That's the first thing. We don't let them create new stuff. That's what we do when we see how this works. That's the first thing. The second is, I rather like the motion that we had the last time. I'm not really interested in having each of us put up a candidate who, and I might put up somebody who's not from Cupertino. I might say, we have some really smart people in Mountain View and Sunnyvale or Los Altos Hills, and I'd rather have somebody like that. Still in the service territory, still a residential customer, but I think might add more value than people that are known to me in my city. And yeah, okay, so I'm less interested in doing a focus group kind of committee. I'm more interested in getting, very thoughtful advice from people who, are bring something and knowledge and experience to the table. So I realize I have a difference with some of the folks up here, but I was quite happy with what we did on September 13th. I'm frankly uncomfortable with the idea that we would form a subcommittee to winnow down candidates, and somehow the representation would then be, shaped into something that, if I felt strongly about getting a particular person on and I'm not on the subcommittee, how would I feel if that person didn't make the subcommittee's list? So, I realize that maybe by having a subcommittee we can balance and do this and that, but I think we're overthinking this. That's number one. And number two, I'm rather happy with the system that we proposed in mid-September.
Okay, can I go to public comment, or go ahead, Director Givens? There's an overweighting on this side.
Yes, but there is this side of the dais.
So you get to talk twice as long.
Okay, so questions. In response to other comments, I would agree with Director Griffith and his summary, which my mind for names has gone away, but the conversation is that we agreed that I got distracted. I agree that this board is transient. We agreed it would be transient, and that we agreed we need to have a different kind of group going forward to advise us, and we need time to put that together. So I'm very comfortable that that was a really clear consensus when I left the meeting last time, so I'm good with that. But if I may, we're talking a lot about the purpose of this group, its mission and so forth. Could we ask Mr. Suleiman to come up? And I wanted to ask him, my understanding of what we were trying to do here was when the staff first came to us with their list of programs, the programs, we said we needed to have input from the user groups. And you, at that time, were talking about why it's important to have programs out there now. What we're trying to do is build a relationship with our user groups. And to me, and you're going to express it hopefully better than I just did, but I very strongly felt that the programs are important to identify and get out there. But I thought the strongest point was trying to connect with the users more than the programs themselves, if I may.
Yes, to rephrase that, and I spoke of our urgency to put on some programs to engage our customers early on, so that we can actually build relationships with our customers. We enroll them and they don't know us. So, and in our marketing effort, I felt that we need to market something. We don't want to market ourselves. We want to market the programs. We want to market the value. So the sooner we launch one or two programs, the sooner we can actually do some marketing that would create awareness and increase engagement and define the value that we're bringing back to the community. And we vetted some programs, we had a list of them, and at that time, if you remember, we had some public input that, hey, wait a minute, you're working in vacuum, you need to include the public, which I totally agree. And then we kind of put the brakes on that for a second and went down this route to create this committee. Did I summarize this?
Yeah, that's very well said, thank you. So in my mind, when we're talking about the makeup of the group we're talking about right now in this short-term group, it's to address that. It's to get the connections and the programs and the buy-in of the community. So that's what I'm thinking about when we discuss the makeup of the group. And so that's it. So that's where I'm coming from. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that.
Okay, so let me open public comment at this time. Mr. Carnegie.
So for those of you who've been in marketing or worked with people who were in marketing and survived that experience. Let me reflect that no sample of 12 or 15 individuals can possibly be representative of 250,000 ratepayers across 3 major customer classes. So you cannot use a group of this size, no matter how carefully selected, to bounce ideas off of and hope that the answers they give you will be representative of what you would have gotten if you'd gone out to a sample size of 500 or 1,000 people who were properly selected. This problem gets even worse when you realize that all of the advisors will be self-selected and then reselected by yourselves. So what is this group able to be good at? What it should be able to be good at is, first of all, to take the criteria that the board and the staff have established for what are the characteristics of a really good program, and deciding whether proposed programs are really good based on those criteria. They provide an extra set of eyes to support staff. Staff currently is rather small compared to 12 to 15 interested representatives of the public. I think it will increase your confidence that the analysis that staff has done and run by the advisory committee is good, solid analysis, and shorten the amount of time that you personally have to spend thinking about whether the criteria of the good programs were in fact met. Another thing that they might be able to do is, over the period of 9 months, become educated enough to be passionate advocates for SVC and its programs. This is particularly true if their recommendations are supported by the board, and they can go back to their friends and say, hey, you know, I was on this for 9 months, we looked at a bunch of programs, and we've picked some really good ones. The reason why I originally proposed 1 representative from each city is I hope that these people will then sort of try to catalyze the communities that you all serve to meet their greenhouse gas reduction goals, not just by signing up for SVCE, but by doing other things. Now, I admit that they're in a weak position to do that. The one and only one person in each of the cities who's gone through the 9-month process, who's looked at all the programs, the good ones, the bad ones, the intermediate ones. But without having such a person in your city, I think there's very little chance that there'll be a strong uptake of the recommended programs in your city. So I hope, Rod, you'll find an eligible, strong Cupertinan to be your link. And Rob, same thing in Los Gatos, etc. I think the original proposal was quite strong, and I hope that you will stick to that to the greatest degree possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public wish to address us? Step forward and give us your name. And if possible, fill out a card. Do we have cards to fill out?
Sorry, I wasn't planning on talking.
After the fact is okay.
I was just coming to observe. My name is Leslie Brown. I live in Campbell. I previously worked for Silicon Valley Power, the municipal utility for City of Santa Clara, for about 17 years. And I currently work for Peninsula Clean Energy. So I'm just here sort of observing as my first opportunity to come and see my local CCA in action. But the comment I wanted to make was in regards to the sort of diversity of the makeup of the group of the advisory committee. I would strongly encourage a plan that takes into consideration that you may have some expertise that is maybe concentrated in a couple of cities more so than others, and not necessarily stick too rigidly to make sure to have one particular person from every single city represented. You could have 3 or 4 really great people in Sunnyvale or Mountain View, and maybe not have a really great candidate from Montessorino apply as possible. So from that kind of perspective, I'd really encourage you to try to have you take in consideration the regionality, but then also give some flexibility to the staff to recommend maybe some particular appointments for people that are showing some strengths in areas that might be lacking in some of the other applicants that come forward. So.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else wish to address us? Seeing none, I'll close the public testimony, come back to the board. Director Yulo?
I just want to quickly point out, we keep referring to this as a 9-month process when appears it's actually going to be a 6-month process. If they don't meet till January, if they don't meet till January and their report is due in June, it's actually only a 6-month appointment.
Okay, other comments? Director Griffith?
I'll just raise one. I mentioned early on that I was supportive of staff's motion, the staff's proposal. Mr. Carney raised some good points about making sure that we are, of the purpose of this being making sure that we have good programs. But we've already got a TAC that will tell us on a technical level in terms of the efficiency and the effectiveness what is good. For me, a good program isn't any good if people aren't interested in using it. And so one of the purposes of this group, which is separate from the TAC and separate from the technical analysis of whether or not it's good, is what do people think, what do they want? You know, and from that point of view, that's what I'm really looking at this group focused on. And that's why I want this group to have as broad a range. I want to see a senior, a family, someone who's a member of a large family, a young person. I want to see an environmentally strong person. I want to see a fiscal conservative. That's what I'm looking for, and the reason why I like staff's recommendation is if each of us picks one, we won't get that. We won't even get close.
And you want a naysayer.
And I want a naysayer. And the thing is, so it puts me in the position, if I'm trying to select one person, do I pick the best applicant from my group, or do I try and figure out what all of you are going to pick and try and pick somebody different? And a subcommittee can do that a whole lot better than 12 of us each picking one. So from that, I'm ready for a motion. I don't know if it'll pass, but I am ready for one if there are no other comments.
Okay, Director Griffith? Gibbons, sorry.
Thank you. So I'm listening to what you're saying. I did like where we were at the last meeting. I do like the idea of each city having their own person. I understand the dynamics of a big group. But I think that the group could subdivide and do different things depending on its makeup too. I do agree with the technical committee and so forth. That's not the role of this group. We're really trying to get the user, community member buy-in of what programs that they'll use. So I like that aspect of it. At the executive committee, we said that, for example, if a city like Montessorino or Campbell didn't have someone, you could give your nominee to the CEO, and they could pull someone from other applicants. So there was a way to build up the diversity of the group with the 3 people, at least, from the CEO's perspective, and we could all nominate that and give a backup person. So I liked the idea of us giving a primary person and then a second person that would help round out the group that the CEO could choose from. I think we also had the question of businesses and corporations, and last time, and I think again tonight reinforced, that because of the nature of our large businesses, that they are going to be evaluated and worked with by staff at a different level, and they will have the money set aside for them. So I'm comfortable that they're taken care of. I know the last time, the one I'm struggling with right now is the last time when there was pretty strong, and I think the motion carried it, we were talking about residential customers. We really excluded businesses, and I'm not quite sure we should exclude small businesses because they're part and parcel of what makes our communities thrive. So I'm inclined to think of that. Yeah, I don't know if that was right. So I'm a little more open to that. I'm worried about the bureaucracy of having a subcommittee, because if we do, then we're going to have to do what you just said. We're going to have to give a list of categories to be filled. So I'm not sure that a subcommittee would get the same list of subcommittee members that you're looking for. So you can help me with that. I did like the simplicity of just getting this done. I wanted to hopefully get it done so people could actually be appointed and even having meetings in December. I really wanted to get this group going. The sooner the better. So that's my hesitancy about going to a subcommittee. So where I stand right now is I like the idea of every city having their own person. I accept that we need 15 people with 3 appointed by the CEO. There may be an additional seats appointed by the CEO. if people can't come up with someone from their own community. I understand that that might not provide the greatest mix of young, old, and environmentalists that might be advantageous, but my focus is on the everyday user and what we need to do to engage them within the next 3, 6, 9 months as soon as possible. So that's where I'm at right now.
Okay, so recognizing that Director Cortese may have to leave soon, did you have any comments you wanted to add?
Well, mostly housekeeping. I'm supportive of option A. I think that's plenty good enough for an advisory board. If they had some legislative duties or quasi-judicial duties or something, I'd be a lot more concerned about it. Given the diversity of the county and even my district for that matter, I'm pretty clear that we'll have plenty of options, at least on my side of town. What I just wanted, the housekeeping item is the background, page 1 of 3, on the staff report for item 5, says each city would appoint one resident who's an SVCE customer. The application acknowledges the county unincorporated areas in Los Gatos, which I believe is a town officially, as a term of art. I don't know if that's just something in the future that needs to be cleaned up when we're making motions and doing legal documents, so that we're not referencing members synonymous with cities, because it's not. And,
agency member should be the term or something like that.
Right. Later on in the application, it talks about member communities. I think that's a pretty cool term for what we represent here. We're members of this agency, and we represent specific communities, whether they're cities, county, town, well, whatever that jurisdiction might be. But I was mainly just wanting to clarify that the county is included, and I'm going to assume that since the application has unincorporated on it, it is.
Yeah.
At least the one that's in this packet.
I think last time we had a little bit of question, or maybe it was executive committee, about if the county is appointing, do they have to appoint unincorporated, or could your district, somebody from Cupertino, because they're also in the county? It was sort of.
I have no problem either way, you guys, however you want to do it. If it's anybody in the county, that's fine. If it's unincorporated only, that probably works too. But interestingly, if this happens before Milpitas is brought in, it would. Milpitas has to be part of the district that I'm elected from. It would be an interesting possibility, at least, to open up the applicant pool to include Milpitas in anticipation of their representation here. So I'm sure there's other ways to clean that up later. But anyway, thank you. That's my 2 cents. And I don't know if we're going to call the question. I'll hang in here for a couple more minutes.
I'm not sure we have a question yet, but we'll try. Okay, Director Sinks.
Yeah, so I've also had some experience with product marketing and how you get feedback. And, it's a great idea to think, I'm going to get one young person and I'm going to get one old person, and they're going to represent all young people and all old people. But professionals would say, no. I mean, I think Bruce is right about this. That's what you do with focus groups. They can be really larger. You come in and you ask them a series of focus questions and you get their reaction. So I think, we would, if we empower this group to go, give them the resources to do focus groups and ask those questions at the right time, once they've sorted out maybe a few things, right? Throwing everything at a focus group doesn't work, but you can narrow it down, and then you can say, okay, we really want to hear from youth. And you may have a focus group that is just focused on youth, and you could get, who knows, you could get youth commissioners, you could get all kinds of folks, but get a broader answer than just, quantity one. Same with seniors or whatever. I think professionals in marketing would probably tell you that's more effective. So I'm good also with option A, but the only thing I would do is add the flexibility to say, instead of the board will each select one member from their community, I would say the board is, each board member will select somebody from who's resident of the SVCE service territory. And I like Liz's idea about a small business owner, you know, and the representation that could come from that. Again, that could be done with a focus group too, right? So it's not just a small business owner, right? Because one person can have a quite different opinion than a group of 10 or 12. But I think it would be really, I mean, this idea that we want to find out, that Jim has, right, and Liz has, that we want to really find out what would be, what would sell well and what our residents and ratepayers would appreciate, I think is a great idea. I just urge people to think about what Bruce had to say, and it certainly resonates with my experience. So I'd be prepared to offer a motion on option A when people are done talking.
Director Miller?
I'll support any motion that moves this interim short-term thing forward, though I do want to point out, if you couldn't tell before, I'm a little bit disappointed that we're spending a lot of time, because we tried to give direction last time to simplify the short-term thing and focus our effort on defining a long-term vision of what the committees are. And Jim explained it better than I did, but I don't want to say we're wasting our time. It's important that we figure this out, but I thought we did this last time where we said, no, we want this for the short-term answer, come back with a long-term answer. Instead, what we got back was, we don't like what you told us for the short-term answer. We don't have anything for the long-term answer. We want you to change your short-term plan. But again, I will support any motion that moves this short-term thing forward tonight so we can get staff directed on our plan to come up with a long-term
Not have it come back
strategy.
in yet another month, right?
Director Koga.
Thank you. So I support option A, but I actually would support it the way it is with one member from each community, and understand
What if I like carbon-free Mountain View, and I think...
And I understand, but I guess I agree with what Bruce said. For me, I was looking at this as, you know, a representation, as it's been mentioned, of our customers, and I'm actually not looking for expertise or technical expertise. I'm looking for the average person who's, you know, a ratepayer, and what would get them excited to sign up for a program. And so it doesn't have to be a great, you know, I mean, and this is how we might even get the naysayer, is like, I think we should be, that's what we should be looking for, is, you know, who is representative of your community? And I think we know best, no offense to staff or anything, but we know our community, and so I think we could pick out that person best. So that's how I look at it, as a representation of all our communities, realizing how diverse our communities are, and the TAC is the technical group, is how I see it. And because it's short term, and you know, they could be also involved in deciding how the long-term process goes, or the focus groups go. But for this, at this point in time, I think it's important to just represent our communities, get buy-in from not just us, but you know, an average person in our communities, to help us get the word out. And so that's how I'm looking at this point. And so, you know, if we're not going to pick from our communities, then I would agree with Jim and just do a smaller group of 8 to 10. But I think at this point, for me at least, the most important thing is to get buy-in from all of our communities. So for that reason, I would support the one from each community. And then, you know, I think we all are going to be mindful of the different categories, so we should go out and try to recruit people that are representative of those communities. And, you know, if it would help if we had maybe 2, we put up 2 names, and then, and I mean, it could be a hybrid. I was thinking you could put up 2 names, and the subcommittee can then pick and choose to get all of the different categories filled, and that's another way to do it. But if you want to just pick A and B, then I think A right now is the way I would go.
So maybe I'll just offer my 2 cents at this point. I guess I think I'm more aligned with what Jim said. I all along have not been that comfortable with having each, you know, community, or being, it almost felt like I was forced to go choose somebody from my community when that might not be the right person. And I worried all along about everybody choosing their environmental expert, which is not the person they're going to do these programs anyway. What I thought we wanted was feedback from people that, are the naysayers or don't know very much, or the average person. But Margaret started touching on an idea I've been starting to have, that we've had enough discussion up here that if we are going to each go appoint some person, hopefully enough of us, maybe half of us, are thinking, well, gee, I'm not going to appoint the environmental expert in my town. I'm going to try to find somebody that's a good thinker and maybe doesn't know that much yet and is a consumer and so forth. So although I would prefer something more along a staff recommendation, I am hoping sounds like we may go the other way, that, we will do as I'm hoping. Any other comments?
I wanted to just add one more thought. I know, our cities have generalists that are on this TAC, right? They're sustainability managers. A lot of them don't know very much about energy efficiency. So you're getting a view from a generalist who's a sustainability manager. I would argue there are people in this room that are in the audience that know more about about effective programs and how to evaluate them than our so-called TAC, okay? So I would just throw that out to you as, again, yes, we do want programs that are going to have good uptake, right? The question of how you go solicit their feedback and engage them to figure out what the most effective ones are can be done without, I won't, I've said enough, so. But all I would say is the sustainability managers as a pool don't necessarily have a lot of the expertise that I would want in coming to conclusions about the best programs. So.
Okay, so can I have a motion that we can test?
I would make a motion.
Okay, go ahead, Director
Okay.
Gibbons.
So I would make a motion consistent, if you could put the other slide up from the previous. Okay, so I would make a motion which is consistent with the items listed here from our September 13th meeting, with a refinement that if a director cannot identify a person, that vacant position would be given to the CEO to fill as part of, they would be additive to the CEO, and each jurisdiction would provide, as their will and availability, a pool of applicants for the CEO to fill those 3 or other positions.
I'll second that.
And so let me ask a clarifying question. So I'm assuming the application would mention the areas of experience that we're interested in, but we're not going to do this active trying to get it, but we will list it so those people may appear because they know we're looking.
I would accept that clarification along with the technical adjustments recommended by Director Cortese.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, the secretary's okay with changes. Any other comments? Director Griffith?
Yeah, in the city of Sunnyvale, we have consistently used subcommittees to select from pools. We have never once used one council member, one vote, and we have always gotten very good results. I think the subcommittee is the best practice, so I will not be supporting this motion.
Director Schmidt?
Yeah, I just want to circle back to the idea of the charter. I think a couple of directors said this should be really easy. That's not in the motion. I'm not sure if it's here. But hopefully this charter is defined, and we get a chance to review it. The board gets a chance to review it and refine it. So I don't know if that needs to be added.
Well, might I suggest that then to the motion maker that we include an explicit charter that this committee is formed to evaluate and recommend programs to the SVCE board?
So just my personal experience of sitting through maybe 6 of these sustainability managers roundtable meetings, depending on which of the criteria each member of the roundtable thinks is important, we end up going around and around and around without any clear guidance on which of the criteria, whether it be greenhouse gas reductions, brand awareness, happy customers, whatever, without clarification on these issues, there's a lot of circular arguments.
And if I may, certainly a valid point. I, again, went back to staff's original work when they came forward with the programs, and I liked the structure and the definitions that they had. So in support of what you're saying, perhaps we could try something like the charter of this group is to establish, I'm going to say, 3 priorities of their programs. One is the ease of implementation. Again, this is the marketing engagement. How quickly can we get a program out and engagement? That's one thought. And we may have to come back to have this discussion. One is the highest greenhouse gas reduction potential.
Could you say highest for the bang for the buck, if you will? In other words,
it's another way of phrasing it, yeah.
The best return.
The best
on
return
dollars
of greenhouse gas reduction.
in terms of CO2 equivalents, right?
Yes, yes. And the third one might be what? Something of their choice? Something they would pick a third priority? You have, Steve, you have the experience of the round table. What are some of the?
Yeah, I think already having 2 or 3 is problematic. So it just allows for a much wider variety of programs. Is it really a cost per GHG reduction, or is it getting 9 out of 10s from surveys of people that did the programs?
So to me, it's marketing. To me, coming back, we need to engage our user group. That's this short-term imminent need. So that was my first start.
So is that brand awareness or what?
Brand awareness.
Okay.
So we heard from the marketing survey on Monday night that,
Yep.
what our customers want most is greenhouse gas reductions.
Right.
They didn't say they want to be happy about their utility. They want greenhouse gas reductions. They want help reducing their carbon footprint.
So that's exactly what I'm trying to say, exactly. So do we want to say their charge is to identify programs that reduce greenhouse gas? My only question is, we don't want something that's going to take 6 to 12 months to be implemented. We want things that happen, I think, short, medium, and long term. So that's my only, I'm happy to limit it to 1 priority, and I would support saying we're looking for ideas that are short, medium, and long term, meaning can be accomplished and initiated in 3 months, initiated in 6 months, and initiated in 9 months.
Director Yulo, you have a comment?
Well, I was saying this is really muddying up the motion on the floor.
That's right.
I would, well, no, I don't think, I think you bring up a great point of us needing to get clarity on this, but I don't know that right here, right now is the time to do it.
Okay.
So I was gonna suggest that maybe we backtrack from this part of the conversation, deal with the motion on the floor, and then talk about the process for establishing the charge.
I'm fine with keeping the motion clean.
Yeah, I guess I'm good with that. I mean, what that would allow us to do is at least get this process of selection rolling, which, time's a waste, and against, I think, Margaret or somebody talked about the fact that it was only 6 months. And then in parallel, I mean, even at the next board meeting, we could maybe give some more clear direction as we're going through the process. So.
That'd be great.
Okay.
All right.
Are we ready to call a question? Let me ask a clarifying question of our council first. So how many votes do I need to pass? Do I need 7 votes? Or
You need 7 votes, otherwise we're
so
back to
2 people vote
what
no,
happened
then it
last
won't
meeting.
pass, yeah.
That is correct.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Can you ask the clarifying question, if it doesn't pass, what direction is staff executing to?
No, we
The
ask
action-
for more motions after that. Or
No, because I believe if we couldn't come to any consensus, the last direction we gave is option A.
So what happens then is you go back to what was approved at the last meeting, if nothing else is approved this evening.
Well, I like the additions that Director Gibbons has proposed, the changes, and so I think it's making it a little better and refining it. But from here on out, I would like to move forward, so hopefully we can get a quorum, 7 votes.
The reason I asked is I was considering voting no, but I do want it to move forward, and I know I would be the one that would kill it. I definitely didn't want it muddied. I was going to definitely vote no if we added the mud to it. So,
okay.
At this point, I think I will be supporting it. So I'm going to call the motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? So it passes 7 to 1. Question from, or comment from staff?
I just wanted to bring up my comment card.
Thanks.
Or my speaker card.
Pamela?
If I could just get one clarification. So the residential customer then stays the same. I just need to know this for the application, because I would have to refine it, because right now it's written as live or work. So we're omitting small, medium business, it's residential only. I just want to clarify that, as that's how it's written in the motion. Or that's how it passed in the previous motion. Just want to clarify.
I'm, for myself, I'm fine with it being resident only or small business, whatever the rest feel.
So the question is, what really did we just pass in the motion?
Well,
So
it
we
wasn't
passed
clear.
it just as residents. We did, the motion as written and shown on the board was resident only.
Okay.
So
that's the way it stands, unless somebody would like to make an alternate, another motion to adjust, or we'll leave it at that?
Mr. Chair, if
Okay,
I may, I do want to say thank you to staff, because I thought that they're bringing these clarifications and their perspective to the executive committee in particular, and also here tonight. It really is good for us to have these discussions. It does take time, but it is good that we understand each other and what we think is the right thing to do. And it's good for staff to understand that as well. So I appreciate that they really had questions and they wanted to help us come up with the best decision possible. So I am appreciative of the fact that they asked for some clarity.
All right, so
Can we give direction to staff to get a timeline for actually coming up with our long-term plan?
that was going to be my next question is, that was asked about but never answered. Could you give us some idea what staff is thinking to start?
So after going back and reviewing the last meeting, it was not clear that that was a specific direction given to staff. It was discussed among the board that the board would need to define the purpose of forming a longer serving customer advisory committee. So we have not taken any action on this at this time. If there's direction otherwise, let us know.
So if the next step is it coming back to us, then let's cue this up for the next meeting to start the discussion.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's not the way it's agendized. I don't think we can discuss that tonight.
I agree.
Yeah, so I would hope we could give direction to add it to the next agenda to have us kick off that discussion of how we want to come up with the plan for the long term.
We can definitely ask for agenda items, yes. We won't discuss them tonight.
That was my request.
Director Yulo.
So, but the thing that's still out there is the charter of the temporary group, yeah. So do we want to have that on our next agenda with some proposal as well? And that seems like that would be right for the Sustainability Managers Roundtable to discuss in the interim as well.
Yeah, right. What would be helpful in their view to balance and get some residents, right? Yeah. So yeah, I think that's excellent.
I'd be supportive of those 2 items on the next agenda.
Okay.
Thank you.
So then we'll close that item, and let's see, so we've done 4 and 5. Let me go back to item number 2, which is the executive committee report, which is basically the executive committee talked about everything we've talked about tonight. We talked about the letter to Milpitas, and we talked about item 5, and then item 6 we haven't gotten to. I think we also talked about that. And staff has adjusted their material based on our inputs I can see, so that's pretty much what occurred in the executive committee. Did anybody want to add to that or add questions? Okay. Seeing none, does anybody from the public wish to comment on that? Seeing none, I'll close item number 2, and we'll go to the CEO's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a few points to make. Just to review the Cal CCA meeting that we had. It was the annual CCA meeting down in Riverside on October 2nd. And then there was a board meeting the following day with the operating CCAs on October 3rd. And I also thank Director Sinks for your support and attendance there. The overall mood of the retreat was really high energy, but we were all made aware that in 2018, it's a pivotal year for all CCAs with some very large battles on the regulatory and legislative front, of which you'll be apprised of by Hillary in a moment. I also attached a PowerPoint from an excellent opening presentation by Don Weiss of MCE to kind of give you an overview of the challenges that have been overcome and what remains. Also, the very next day we had the Cal CCA board meeting and the budget was discussed. I attached a proposed budget for fiscal year 17-18 as well as 18-19 for your review. The emphasis in that budget is to have adequate funding for a litigation fund that all CCAs will contribute to. And there is a proposed fixed and variable formula defining that contribution for each CCA. For us, we have right now $100,000 budgeted for that litigation fund. With this proposed budget from the board meeting, it would probably go up to about $150,000. But with the challenges ahead of us, that would be money well worth spent. So we would handle that in the mid-year review. Also, we want to alert the board to a CPUC workshop that is occurring at the end of this month. It's a community choice workshop on October 31st in Sacramento with the goal of gathering stakeholder input on global and national electric market choice models, including California's 2020 market. There'll be an opportunity to attend this via WebEx as well. I really don't have any more information than that, but as it trickles down to me, we'll make sure that
What's the date and time?
October 31st.
Help me.
Also wanted to update the board on our long-term power supply. So our request for offer, or RFO process, continues. This is the long-term power supply that we're doing jointly with Monterey Community Power. We conducted a pre-bidders conference on September 28th. Over 30 suppliers attended the WebEx, so that tells me we're going to have a pretty good pool of information to review. The window to respond closes this Friday, so we'll start the evaluation process next week, and we plan on having those results presented at the November board meeting as well. A couple of financial notes to make. I mentioned in the September board meeting about a $2 million deposit that we made with Z Global based on the hot weather, and we were net buyers from CAISO. When it was all said and done, we were asked to post another $1.3 million in a deposit. And about a week after that, CAISO did make a call for that deposit. So in the September financials, you'll see $3.3 million in deposits with CAISO, but again, we'll get that money back at the end of the year. We'll also kick off our Finance and Audit Committee at the end of this month, primarily to choose an external auditor, and I'll bring that contract for you at the November board meeting. And also wanted to update the board on staff will start evaluating investment strategies. Right now we have money sitting in the checking account. It's earning $0 interest. However, November 25th would be our last big power supply payout day for September power. So I've kind of restrained on investing surplus until we got through these high power supply cost months. So we'll start briefing the board on our investment strategies in December for sure. And also on the CEO agreements section, I just want to point out item 1 talks about bucket 2 volumes, and I just wanted to point out, based on our conversation Monday night, that is not a seller's choice contract. That is specifies wind, so good news there. And that would close out all our bucket 2 positions for 2018. And then lastly, I want to thank the board as well as the public that attended our Power Procurement Policy Direction Workshop this past Monday night. I think it was a great discussion, and we have a lot of follow-up items that we'll be briefing the board on, whether it's at the Executive Committee, the Risk Oversight Committee, certainly the Board of Directors meetings over the next 3 months or so. With that, I'd like to yield to Hillary for a regulatory update.
Good evening, directors. Hillary Staver, Regulatory and Legislative Affairs. So, as you may have seen from the update in your packet, it has been a very busy month, and that is going to continue pretty much into the foreseeable future. The biggest news that we have in the past month is that we now have much greater visibility into the progress of the PCIA reform proceeding of the CPUC. So in late September, we got a scoping memo, which is a document that basically lays out the schedule and the topics that will be covered for the rest of the proceeding. The proceeding, starting most broadly, it's going to run through July 2018, as I mentioned on Monday, and we are most probably looking at January 2019 start date for a reformed PCIA. Going into a little bit greater detail, there are two tracks in the proceeding. The first one is going to be relatively quick, and that deals with PCIA exemptions for care and medical baseline customers. This is something that Marin Clean Energy in particular has been taking a lot of leadership on, because we currently have somewhat of a mosaic of regulations that varies by IOU across the state in terms of how the PCIA is applied to these customer groups. So that's track one. But then track two is the one that we're sort of the one that everyone was expecting, which is the evaluation and reform of the PCIA methodology. So where we are currently, we're in the first stage of the proceeding, which focuses on data access. Access to the contracts that go into calculating the amount that is recoverable through the PCIA is something that we've been kind of battling over for a while now, starting with the PCIA working group that was convened about a year ago now. So where we currently are is we are negotiating with the IOUs about what type of data they are going to be willing to release and make accessible to CCA staff and also their consultants in this proceeding. And from there, once we have that data, we can go into using that, analyzing it, and developing our eventual proposal for PCI reform. So we are looking at the next couple months is going to be on data negotiations. Then in March 2018, that's when testimony is due, proposing the actual reforms. And then between March and July, there's going to be cross-examination, discussion of the alternatives, and eventually the commission will make their decision. In terms of how we are handling this, there's a concerted effort among the operational CCAs working through CalCCA. So we do have a working group that's meeting once a week to actively to collaborate on this process and develop our group strategy. We have retained Evelyn Call of Alcantara & Call, which is a law firm that has extensive experience in this area in energy and also with CCAs. So she is representing us as CalCCA's official counsel. And the next thing, in terms of near-term deadlines, we're looking at 2 public workshops, which will be held in mid-October and mid-November. And this was a real victory for us in terms of providing education opportunities, excuse me, given that the CCA community has grown significantly since the commission first started looking at PCI reform about a year ago. And so we were adamant that we wanted to make sure we had educational opportunities available at the beginning of this proceeding to make sure that everyone, including our newest operational CCAs, had the chance to be fully brought up to date. In terms of things that did not appear in the proceeding, the biggest omission from the scoping memo that we were hoping for was we had proposed a third track that would look specifically at creating guidelines for IOU management of their own portfolios in order to ensure that all of the costs that they are asking to recover through the PCIA are truly unavoidable. So far, there has been relatively little scrutiny of the standard that is required for recovering costs to the PCIA is that they are unavoidable above market costs, but there has been very little scrutiny of what that term unavoidable truly means. The way it's played out is generally if the contract was originally approved by the CPUC, which all of them are, then it is considered unavoidable. So this was not a track that appeared in the final scoping memo, but we are planning to try and include elements of that in the other conversations, because we do feel that this is an important part of the equation, that we make sure that we're trying to ensure that this portfolio of contracts is managed in such a way that the costs that actually have to be recovered to the PCIA are minimized. So that's the PCIA, and then briefly on a couple others.
Hillary, can I ask a question
Yeah,
before
absolutely.
you move on? It sounds like, based on both what Dawn's comments about the litigation fund and the amount of time you dedicated to this and the fact that outside counsel has been hired and what have you, that people are taking this very seriously. But my question is, are there other things people have discussed doing that would be helpful in this regard that aren't being done due to a lack of resources? Or is everything that possibly can be done being done?
I would say that, at least at this point in the proceeding, I think we are pretty much covering all the important pieces. This early in the proceeding, when we are doing things like negotiating on data access, it's a fairly technical conversation, and I do feel that we have done a good job of convening people with the background to have that conversation from operational CCAs across the state. I think that having representation at the workshops will be very helpful. Those are open to the public, and I think that having representatives from the CCA community in all roles will be helpful for that. And definitely having counsel to present a unified front for the CCA community is very helpful. But I would say at the moment, I think it's definitely taking a lot of time and resources from the players involved, but I feel like we're doing a good job of covering the areas that need to be covered.
Thanks.
And I will be happy to report back if that changes and if there's anything that the board or our communities can do to improve that coverage.
I mean, that would be terrific, because obviously this is a time to dig in and invest more resources if there ever was a time in our life, in the life of this organization.
And I would encourage, in that vein, I would encourage you to attend the October 31st workshop, because this conversation about the PCIA, it is being watched by those who will have influence over the broader conversation about retail choice reform. And the sense that I have gotten is that the outcome of this proceeding, sort of the broader conversation about retail choice reform, is to some extent waiting on the resolution of this proceeding, because what happens with the PCI will have a big impact on the CCA community going forward. Mm-hmm. And right now CCAs are the biggest sort of non-IOU player, or at least the fastest growing.
So before you move on, I think Director Sinks also wants to ask on this subject.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a comment on what Don said about the recent meeting and your fine work, and I really appreciate it. You know, I was sitting down at this conference. I could only attend for a few hours. I flew down early in the morning, and then I had to leave to come back for my council meeting. But I thought it was well worth my time. There were people sitting at the table I was at who were a city manager and some council members that were just thinking about this. And for us to talk about what the strong financial position we're in and how we've handled this carbon thing and how we have a lot of confidence. We have legislative challenges and regulatory challenges, to be sure, but I think, you know, our being there and giving them confidence is important, because the political equation is this: if we get Southern California to adopt this widely, the legislature will follow. But, you know, at the end of the session, there were a whole lot of bad bills and gotten amendments to bills. We all rallied our own locals, but, you know, there are folks in Southern California, Pasadena and Los Angeles area, that put these bills forth. And we need, you know, as far as I'm concerned, like one of the biggest things we could do besides continuing to love our own legislators is make sure that community choice energy spreads, pardon my phrase, turn of phrase, but like wildfire, right, up and down this state. And when it does, when we've convinced the others to go join us, as one of the speakers said, maybe it was Jeff Cyphers said, you know, 2018 is the the no turning back point. If we get through 2018 and we haven't had legislation that takes us, that allows this model not to be replicated elsewhere, we're going to be in great shape. And that doesn't mean we're not going to have challenges at the CPUC, but I think the momentum will have changed, and we will have made this huge contribution to everything. So, boy, I would do a lot to try to encourage everybody to show up at these things. People are watching and they are listening to what we have to say. Go to the microphone, right? I think your points are really well taken, as you can afford to. I think what's at stake is much more than what we can do in Silicon Valley. It's what we can do in the entire state.
Yeah, I would definitely emphasize that
there's a lot of carbon out there besides ours.
And it is never too early to start working on the next legislative session. I mean, we had an excellent positive outcome from this session, thanks to all of you and a lot of other people around the state who pitched in, but there were a number of those fights that we won by a hair based on sort of fights over bills that appeared at the last minute. And it was only because we had a really well-organized, quick responding opposition that it came out the way it did. So most definitely, we have a big fight in front of us next year, and it's never too early to start talking to people. We are setting a legislative retreat among CalCCA staff, well, meaning legislative staff around the operational CCAs for November. So I will report back in terms of any more concrete strategies that come out of that. But for the time being, general conversations. I know there's another CCA summit coming up November, I believe. It's November 15th through the 17th in Santa Clara. Close to home. I would encourage everybody to go there and just kind of show your face. So it's definitely, it's going to be a big year, and it is not too early to start rallying the troops for that. So let's see. Well, any other thoughts on PCIA or legislative stuff? All right.
Well, the one thing I've heard recently is, since we got so much water last year, this last season, PG&E does have a fair amount of hydro, and the belief is that the PCIA ought to be coming down because of all the rain this last year. So I don't know I got that from an expert, and I'd welcome CalCCA following up on that idea. We want to know what, this goes to transparency, but it also goes to the fact that it was a record-breaking year for hydro. That should be reflected in this next year and hence in the PCIA.
I have not heard specific discussion of that in relation to the PCIA proceeding, but given that there are a number of CCAs that do rely significantly on large hydro, I would expect that is going to come up, and we will press to make sure that is addressed.
The idea is PG&E purchases a bunch of it, and so when their costs go down, so should that PCIA.
I think that got it backwards, Director Sinks. The issue is contracts they've already bought, the cost of power goes down. The difference between what they can sell this expensive contract for, it gets larger, so the PCIA should go up, not down, if the cost of power is going down.
Well, I don't think
But we don't need to debate that.
Right. We don't have to.
Let's move on.
All right. Well, a couple other quick updates. Director Corrigan is not here tonight, but I did want to follow up on her question on Monday about AB 1110, which, if you recall, is the law that would update the requirements for the power content label. She was asking about other stakeholders who are interested in this besides CCAs. And we are currently, just as of the last 48 hours, working on a joint proposal with the CCAs, SMUD, and the Center for Resource Solutions, which is a nonprofit in San Francisco focused on energy and climate issues. So in addition to the comments that we have already provided and continue to advocate for, we are also working with these other stakeholders to make sure that we have a positive outcome on that. So that's a little more concrete information there. And then also the CCA bond methodology proceeding. We actually, just today in San Francisco, the CPUC went through the first day of evidentiary hearings in that, which involves cross-examination of witnesses. But essentially where we are moving in that proceeding is that most likely at the beginning of the next fiscal year, we should be budgeting for an increase to the posted bond amount in addition to the 100K that we posted already. And Don and I have spoken about this. That will be incorporated into the forthcoming budget planning. But essentially, that proceeding boils down to a conversation about whether the posted bond for CCAs should involve predicted emergency procurement costs. The CCA parties have been working to make sure that the bond amount should only cover administrative costs of returning customers to the IOU in the event of an involuntary mass return of customers. So that conversation is ongoing, but we should expect that whether it works out to be administrative only or administrative and emergency procurement, we most likely will need to be adding something to the budget for that next year. So I will continue to report on that. Hearings continue through tomorrow, and then we'll move through briefings. So this proceeding should be wrapping up probably in the second quarter of 2018. Any questions on those two?
So can we charge PG&E a fee in case they fail?
This proceeding has become an interesting, it's become, I think, almost a bigger conversation than it was originally intended to be, in that it's become sort of this broader conversation about the financial stability of CCAs. So we have been putting a lot of effort into making sure that we are well represented and trying to make points like that whenever possible.
I think Jerry Hill had some interesting ideas today in the press with regard to PG&E and their.
Well, if you recall, during Enron, PG&E also almost went bankrupt at that time, so it's not impossible. Any other questions? Not for Hillary, but for Don. Are you finished, Hillary?
That's all I have for tonight.
Okay, so go ahead, Director Miller.
Oh, mine was back at Don, so put your finance hat back on. You talked about cash balances, you talked about investment. What you didn't mention, what's our strategy for dealing with the revolving and non-revolving lines of credit? We drew on them very slightly. We have a balance. We're paying thousands of dollars a month of interest. When do we get out of those?
Yeah, so the non-revolving line of credit, we paid off in August. So we have not been accruing interest on there. The revolving line of credit, I was just waiting to get through this high power supply cost payday coming up in November, and then we'll retire it then. And so we drew well below those limits of both lines of credit, and we will have everything paid off by December.
The Treasury report doesn't quite reflect the August payoff, depending on how you interpret the graph on page 12. But I wouldn't worry about it right now. It'll show up next time.
Yeah, it doesn't show on there.
Oh. We'll send out a revise.
Okay, so let me open this up to the public. Would any member of the public wish to comment on anything in the CEO's report? Seeing none, I will close the public comment. Any other comments from the board? This is just a accept the report kind of thing. So seeing none, I will close this item and jump to item number 6 is what we have left, Member Agency Working Group.
All right, thank you, Chair Rennie, and good evening, directors. As you know, we've had a sustainability managers roundtable in place for 6 or 7 months now, and it's involved sustainability staff from the participating jurisdictions that have that type of function. And that group has been really helpful in terms of providing input to us on what their respective agencies are doing on their climate action plan work and what they see as priorities for Silicon Valley clean energy. At the same time, we've also had a group called the Communications Working Group. And this group has represented pretty much all of the agencies. And it's been sustainability managers, or it's been administrative personnel or communications personnel. And the principal role that group has played has been engaging with us to provide communications through to their respective communities on enrollment and other activities associated with SVCE. We're starting to see that function die back a little bit because we're through much of our enrollment, and it's really become logical at this point to combine these two functions, the Communications Working Group and the Sustainability Managers Roundtable. In fact, there was a fair amount of overlap in the participation in those groups anyway. So we've formed a new group now that combines those. It's called the Member Agency Working Group, or MOG, which is not the best acronym, but it works. And the purpose of this group is to provide regular input to SVCE staff on member agency climate action plans. So that remains a key function of this, and related to activities. This group will provide input to SVCE's GHG accounting and metrics activities. And in fact, they've played a big role in that to date, such that the resulting data from that effort can then in turn be used by the participating jurisdictions. This group will provide input and feedback on SVCE program development, particularly as it relates to support of agencies' respective CAP goals and activities. This group could also play a key role in helping to develop model ordinances and incentives related to decarbonization and electrification across the member agencies. And this group can also assist with outreach. So as we establish programs, this group can play an outbound function as well, kind of along the lines of the Communications Working Group in the past. So there's been reference to the, I think the tech, what was it called? Some people refer to it, yeah. So that's this function now. The MOG, it'll be run as a working group of staff. Meetings will occur approximately once a month or as needed. But we have right now a very regularly scheduled monthly meeting. So any questions on this at this point?
Questions from the board? Seeing none, I'll see if there's, okay, Director Eula?
Are you done? You said at this point, are you done? Are you?
I'm finished.
Okay. What, you're going to take public comment first?
Yes. So would any members of the public wish to comment on this item? Seeing none, I will close the public comment, come back, see if there's other comments or questions from the directors. Director Eula?
Well, just think in the sense, 2 points. One, in the sense of full disclosure, Mr. Schmidt and I are regular attendees of that group, just so everyone knows. So if you disparage it in front of us, that would be embarrassing for you to do that in front of us. The more functional point I had was that under structure, it says meeting outcomes will be communicated through the monthly CEO report to the board. I don't know, last month we talked about that issue, and I don't know that we said that that's how input from this group would be reported. And I would hope that if there's input on a particular item, that input would be reflected in that item, not in the CEO report.
That makes sense to...
So for instance, on programs, it seems to me silly and not appropriate that if a report on programs is coming to the board, that this group, the working group's input would be reflected in that staff report there, not in the CEO report staff report.
I think the intention here was that it would be both. That there would be a statement that there would be a statement in the CEO report. Okay, here's what's going on with the MOG. Yeah, I think it's safe to say that what flows through the MOG will be flowing through what staff is developing, what's being presented here regularly.
And Don, I totally expected that that's what the intent was. It's just not what the report says, so I wanted to make sure that was cleared up.
We can make that clarification, certainly.
Okay, any other comments on this item? So then I'll close this item, and that's the last one on our regular calendar. Next, we have future agenda items. We did already put a couple of those on the list, and then board member announcements. I guess first I'd like to thank staff for last night, Monday night's presentation. I thought it was exceeded my expectations on all the information, and it looked like it was well sewn together. I could see lots of people put in lots of effort to do that. I thought it was a good idea to get Z Global to also come and present. That was a great idea. So thank you for all the hard work on that. Other comments from directors? Director Griffith?
Yeah, just to make sure, staff's going to come back with us with a future agenda item discussing how we delegate changes to meetings to the chair or information from our attorney that's not necessary, one of the two, I assume? Right. And then just another item, going forward, I would request that all future agenda items have under our regular calendar, the voting items up front and report items at the end.
So I don't have to move them around?
Right. I mean, and it isn't just for Director Cortese. Members of the public who want to comment are going to be most interested in commenting on things we are voting on. Giving them the courtesy of doing that up front, not waiting until 10 p.m. is important.
Okay, other comments? Director Gibbons?
I just wanted to bring attention to the board that PG&E has been advertising quite heavily on Facebook, at least, that they're having a time of use pricing program for businesses starting in November. And I would ask staff to come back to the board and help us understand what that means, because we are tied to PG&E, so I need to feel that we understand the implications of that, because we weren't, at least I wasn't expecting any time of use pricing until January of 2019.
Director Sinks?
I would reinforce that point. And one of the points that wasn't made on Monday that I think is a good follow-on is, today we can aggregate power over a whole year and then figure out how to balance it out. But what's coming in the future, right, is that alignment of wholesale prices and demand. And unless we align prices, well, we'll be out of phase with PG&E. But the state's goal, right, in the end is going to make sure that we've got renewable resources at all hours of the day, and we're servicing demand. So I think, the conversation we ought to start having is to think about what our liability is there. It's going to probably cost more, right? If we have a customer in theory who is buying a 100% solar product from us, the only way to cover that, we don't have that product today, nor have we explicitly talked about it. PG&E happens to, right? But what's going to happen come 2019 is there's going to have to be an alignment, which means there will have to be a storage component. You won't be able to just say, well, we've taken more during the daytime and we're supplying that customer at night. It's going to have to get put together. And I don't know exactly what the regulatory world will do. And so it's a little hard to predict if that's 2019 or whatever, but I think we ought to start thinking about and prepare for the competition that will come as wholesale and retail prices from PG&E align relative to our interest in being carbon free, neutral, etc.
Okay, other comments? Well, seeing none, then I guess anything from staff?
No, sir.
So we're adjourned.